The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as Max Reeves was finishing the dinner service at Bistro 1955. He'd been in the middle of congratulating his staff on another successful night when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Something made him step away from the celebratory atmosphere of the kitchen to take it. "Hello." Max's voice echoed in the empty wine cellar where he'd retreated for privacy. "Hey, big brother." The familiar voice sent a chill down Max's spine. Eddie. His younger brother, whom he hadn't heard from in 5 years. Not since the trial. Max's free hand instinctively gripped the edge of a nearby wine rack, his knuckles turning white. "Eddie. How did you?" "I'm out." Max got released early on good behavior. Eddie's voice carried that same smooth confidence that had always gotten him both in and out of trouble. "Look, I know it's been a while, but I need your help. I want to make things right this time." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Max closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Eddie at 16, stealing from their parents' savings. Eddie at 21, involved in a convenience store robbery. Eddie at 28, getting sentenced to 10 years for grand larceny. Each time, he'd promised to change. Each time, he'd pulled their family deeper into his mess. "I've got a life now, Eddie," Max said, his voice tight. "A successful restaurant, a beautiful wife. I know. I've been following your success from inside. Man, Bistro 1955, that place is all over the food blogs. You did good, bro." Eddie paused, his voice dropping lower. "That's why I'm calling. I need a job, Max. A real one. No schemes, no angles. Just honest work. I want to learn from the best." Max pressed his forehead against the cool stone wall of the cellar. Upstairs, he could hear the muffled sounds of his staff cleaning up, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the weight of this conversation. "Carla won't like this," he muttered, more to himself than Eddie. "Your wife?" "Yeah, I figured." Eddie's voice took on that pleading tone Max remembered from their childhood. "But people can change, right? Isn't that what you always told me?" "I did my time, Max. I took those business courses in prison, got my GED. I'm not the same guy who went in." Max thought about his own journey, from a troubled kid in South Boston to owning one of the city's most respected restaurants. He'd worked his way up from dishwasher to chef, saving every penny, learning every aspect of the business. He'd made it because someone gave him a chance. "Where are you staying?" Max asked, already knowing he'd regret this. "Youth hostel downtown. It's temporary." Max sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Come by tomorrow at 2 p.m. We'll talk. No promises, but we'll talk." "Thanks, Max. You won't regret this. I swear." After hanging up, Max stood in the cellar for a long moment, surrounded by bottles of carefully aged wine. Each vintage represented years of patience, careful tending, and the hope that time would transform something raw into something valuable. Maybe people weren't so different. When he finally climbed the stairs back to the main floor, Carla was waiting. His wife's sharp green eyes took in his expression, and her face fell. "Who was that?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Eddie. He's out." Max moved past her to his office, needing to sit down. Carla followed, closing the door behind them. "No. Absolutely not. Whatever he's asking for, the answer is no. He wants a job, Carla. A chance to start over. Like he wanted to start over after he stole from your parents. Or after he got involved with those loan sharks." Carla's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing at the door. "Max, honey, I know you want to believe in him. But some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are." Max looked around his office, at the framed reviews, the photos of celebrity guests, the certificate naming Bistro 1955 one of Boston's top new restaurants. Everything he'd built could be at risk. But then he thought of Eddie in that prison jumpsuit during his last visit, looking small and scared despite his bravado. One chance, Max said finally. Under strict conditions. First sign of trouble, he's gone. Carla's shoulders slumped. She knew that tone. Max had made up his mind. I hope you know what you're doing, she said softly. Because I have a feeling we're all going to regret this. That night, Max lay awake long after Carla had fallen asleep. Outside their bedroom window, the Boston skyline glittered like broken glass, beautiful but sharp-edged. Tomorrow, he would open his door to his brother, and with it, the possibility of either redemption or ruin. The question that kept him awake wasn't whether people could change, it was whether they truly wanted to. As he finally drifted off, his last thought was of something his father used to say, the thing about family is, they know exactly where to stick the knife, and they know you'll forgive them for it. He wondered if his father had been right about the second part. The next morning would bring Eddie back into his life, and with him, a shadow that would grow longer and darker than Max could possibly imagine. The first month of Eddie's employment at Bistro 1955 unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between hope and suspicion. Max watched his brother master the basics of kitchen work with surprising dedication, showing up early, staying late, absorbing every lesson about food preparation and restaurant operations with an intensity that almost made Max believe in second chances. But Carla saw the shadows. He's different when you're not around, she told Max one night as they lay in bed, her voice barely above a whisper. The way he looks at me, at the safe, at everything. It's like he's calculating. Max rolled over to face her in the darkness. He's trying, Carla. You've seen how hard he works. That's what scares me, she replied, her hand finding his in the dark. He's trying too hard. Like he's performing in a play where we don't know the script. Max wanted to dismiss her concerns, but 20 years of marriage had taught him to trust Carla's instincts. She'd grown up in a household where reading subtle signs of danger had been necessary for survival. If she sensed something off about Eddie, there was probably a reason. The next day, Max started paying closer attention. He noticed the way Eddie's eyes would drift to the office during busy service hours, how he'd linger near the bar when the day's receipts were being counted. Small things, maybe nothing. But maybe not. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after Eddie's return, when everything changed. The dinner service was winding down, the dining room humming with satisfied conversations and the clink of wine glasses. Max was in his office reviewing supplier invoices when he heard the commotion, raised voices, a crash, screams. He burst out of his office to find 3 men in dark jackets standing in the middle of his restaurant. The tallest one, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, was holding a broken wine bottle. The remaining diners sat frozen at their tables, while his staff huddled near the kitchen entrance. Mr. Reeves, the scarred man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. We need to have a conversation about protection. Max's eyes scanned the room, landing on Eddie, who stood near the bar. His brother's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped a glass that was already clean. This is a legitimate business, Max said, keeping his voice steady. We don't need protection. The scarred man's smile widened. Everyone needs protection, Mr. Reeves. Especially successful establishments like yours. Would be a shame if something happened to this beautiful place. He ran his finger along a nearby table's pristine white tablecloth, leaving a smear of dirt. 5,000 a week should cover it. Get out of my restaurant, Max growled, reaching for his phone. Before I call the police. The man's smile didn't waver. Sure, call them. But first, ask your brother about the money he borrowed to expedite his release. Ask him who guaranteed that loan. Max's hand froze over his phone. He turned to Eddie, who wouldn't meet his eyes. Eddie. The word came out like a prayer, like a plea for this to be a mistake. I'm sorry, Max, Eddie whispered. I didn't know how else to get out early. They had connections inside, they could make things happen. I just wanted to come home. The scarred man placed the broken bottle on a nearby table with exaggerated care. You have until Friday to make the first payment. Consider it a family discount, paying your brother's debt and buying our services all in one. He nodded to his companions, and they moved toward the exit. We'll be in touch. After they left, the restaurant erupted into chaos. Diners rushed to pay their bills and leave, while staff members huddled in groups, whispering frantically. Through it all, Max stood rooted to the spot, staring at his brother. Carla appeared at his side, her face tight with fury. I'll start calling our regulars, damage control, she said, her voice clipped. You deal with him. But when Max turned to confront Eddie, his brother was gone. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the staff had been sent home with assurances about their safety, Max sat alone in his darkened restaurant. The place that had been his dream, his achievement, now felt tainted. Every shadow held a threat, every corner harbored betrayal. His phone buzzed, a text from Eddie, I can explain everything. Meet me tomorrow morning before opening. Please, Max, trust me one more time. Max stared at the message until his vision blurred. The word trust glowed on the screen like a brand, burning with all the weight of brotherhood and betrayal. His thumb hovered over the reply button, trembling with indecision. Outside, a car alarm wailed in the distance, its rhythmic shriek cutting through the night like a warning. Max thought about his father's words again, about family knowing where to stick the knife. But now he wondered if the real danger wasn't in the stabbing, but in the way family made you offer your chest to the blade, again and again, hoping this time would be different. The phone buzzed again, I know I messed up. But there's more going on than you know. Things that could destroy everything you've built. Max finally typed his response, tomorrow. 7 a.m. You better have one hell of an explanation. But as he locked up for the night, the shadow of doubt had already crept in, whispering that some explanations only lead to deeper darkness, and some truths are better left buried in the past. The morning light crept through Bistro 1955's windows, casting long shadows across empty tables. Max sat at the bar, nursing his third coffee, watching the door. It was 7:15 a.m., and Eddie hadn't shown. Carla moved silently behind him, counting last night's receipts with mechanical precision. The rhythmic sound of shuffling papers filled the hollow silence between them. They hadn't really spoken since the incident, what was there to say? 20 years of marriage had taught them when words were inadequate. At 7:30, Max's phone buzzed. A text from Eddie, can't make it. Being watched. Meet me at Mom's old place. Noon. Max stared at the message until the screen went dark, his reflection ghostly in the black glass. Their mother's house had stood empty since her death 2 years ago, a shrine to better days that neither brother could bear to sell. He's not coming, is he? Carla's voice was soft, touched with something that might have been pity. No. Max turned to face his wife, really seeing her for the first time that morning. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. She'd been up most of the night, he realized, making calls to their regular customers, damage control. I have to meet him, Max said, watching her face carefully. At Mom's house. Carla's hands stilled over the receipts. It's a trap, Max. You know that, right? Probably. He managed a weak smile. But he's still my brother. And I'm your wife. Carla moved around the bar to stand before him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you remember what you promised me when we got married? That we'd never keep secrets, that we'd face everything together. Max felt the weight of those words, spoken 2 decades ago in a small church in South Boston. They'd been so young, so certain that love could conquer any obstacle. I remember. Then let me tell you what I found last week. Carla's voice trembled slightly. Eddie's been making calls from the restaurant phone after hours. I checked the records. Numbers connected to known crime families in South Boston. The revelation hit Max like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd confront him, and I needed to be sure. She pulled out her phone, showing him a series of photos. Eddie meeting with various men in suits outside the restaurant, exchanging envelopes, having heated discussions in parked cars. I've been documenting everything, Max. Because someone had to protect what we built while you were busy protecting him. Max studied the photos, each one a nail in the coffin of his hopes for Eddie's redemption. But something caught his eye. In several pictures, Eddie's body language showed fear, not complicity. He was hunched, defensive, like a man being squeezed from all sides. There's more, Carla continued. Remember those inventory discrepancies I mentioned last month? Small amounts of our most expensive wines going missing. I checked the security footage. She hesitated. Eddie's been letting people in after hours. They take the wine, but they also leave with something else, envelopes, packages. I think they're using our restaurant for more than just protection money. The implication settled over Max like a shroud. Money laundering. Drug trafficking. The kind of operations that could bring down not just his restaurant, but everything he'd worked for. Why would he do this? The question came out as a whisper. Why come back just to destroy everything? Carla placed her hand over his, her touch anchoring him to the present. Maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe this was the plan all along. Or maybe. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Maybe he's in deeper trouble than even he realizes, and this is his desperate way of reaching out for help. Max checked his watch, 8:45 a.m. 3 hours until the meeting at his mother's house. 3 hours to decide whether to extend one final lifeline to his brother or cut him loose forever. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Carla said, remember that Eddie's not the only one who needs you. Your staff, our customers, everything we've built together, it all depends on what you decide today. Max stood, pulling Carla into a tight embrace. He breathed in the familiar scent of her perfume, letting it remind him of all they'd overcome together. When he pulled back, his decision was made. I need you to do something for me, he said. Call Detective Martinez. Tell him everything you've documented. But ask him to wait until afternoon to move. I need to give Eddie one last chance to explain. And if he doesn't show up again, then I'll know it was all a lie. Max's voice hardened. And I'll help them take him down myself. As Max headed to his office to prepare for the confrontation ahead, Carla's voice stopped him. Max? Just, come back to me, okay? He turned back, seeing in her eyes all the unspoken fears of a woman who'd watched her husband's heart break too many times. Always, he promised. But as he gathered his thoughts for the meeting ahead, a new text arrived from Eddie, bring cash. All you can get. They know about Carla's photos. They're not happy, big brother. Not happy at all. The message sent ice through Max's veins. Suddenly, the stakes weren't just about saving his brother or his business, they were about protecting the one person who'd never betrayed him. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Max felt real fear. Their mother's house stood silent on Dorchester Avenue, its faded blue paint peeling like old scars. Max sat in his car, watching shadows move behind yellowed curtains. The place had been a sanctuary once, before life had taught them all about the fragility of safety. Eddie's last text message burned in his mind, they know about Carla's photos. The words carried the weight of every nightmare he'd ever had about losing her. He'd left Carla at the restaurant with 2 off-duty police officers, friends who owed him favors from better days. She'd protested, but her eyes had held understanding, the kind that comes from knowing what it means to live with fear as a constant companion. The front door creaked open. Eddie emerged onto the porch, looking older than Max remembered from just days ago. Their eyes met across the overgrown yard, and for a moment, Max saw the little boy who used to crawl into his bed during thunderstorms, seeking protection from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come alone," Eddie said as Max approached. His voice carried the rasp of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Funny, I was thinking the same about you." Max studied his brother's face, noting the fresh bruises poorly concealed beneath his collar. "Who are you really afraid of, Eddie?" Eddie's laugh was hollow, empty of everything except pain. "You want the list? The guys from the restaurant? They're just foot soldiers. The real players." He shuddered. "Let's talk inside. These walls have heard enough family secrets, what's one more?" The house's interior was a museum of frozen memories. Photos lined the walls, birthdays, graduations, moments when the future had seemed full of possibility rather than threat. Their mother's reading chair still held the impression of her body, as if she might return any moment to dispense wisdom or comfort. "Remember when she used to wait up for us?" Eddie's voice was soft as he traced the chair's worn fabric. "No matter what trouble we'd gotten into, she'd be sitting right here, ready to listen without judgment." "She judged plenty," Max corrected, remembering the steel beneath their mother's gentle exterior. "She just loved us anyway." "Yeah." Eddie's shoulders slumped. "I really screwed up, Max, worse than you know." "Then help me understand." Max fought to keep his voice steady. "Because right now, all I see is my little brother using my restaurant to launder money for criminals. The same brother who's letting those criminals threaten my wife." Eddie flinched at the mention of Carla. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. When they approached me in prison, they said they could get me out early. Clean slate, fresh start. All I had to do was help them set up some business connections once I was out." His laugh turned bitter. "Should have known better. People like them don't offer fresh starts, they offer nooses disguised as lifelines." "What kind of business connections?" "High-end restaurants are perfect for their operation. Lots of cash flow, respectable clientele, wine shipments that nobody looks too closely at." Eddie's words tumbled out now, like poison finally being purged. "They wanted me to get close to you, learn your operation. Then they'd start small, a few wine deliveries with extra inventory, some special customers who needed private dining rooms for meetings. By the time anyone noticed something wrong, their hooks would be in too deep to remove." Max's fists clenched at his sides. "And you agreed to this? To destroy everything I've built?" "I agreed because they showed me photos of you and Carla." Eddie's voice cracked. "Photos of your house, your routine, everything. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The revelation hit Max like a physical blow. "How long?" he demanded. "How long have they been watching us?" "Months before I got out. They've got people everywhere, cops, prison guards, city officials. I thought if I played along, I could figure out a way to protect you. But they're always 3 steps ahead." Eddie moved to the window, peering through the curtains. "And now Carla's photos, they see it as a betrayal. They're going to make an example of us." Max's phone buzzed, a text from one of the officers watching Carla, all quiet at the restaurant. "She's safe." The momentary relief was shattered by Eddie's next words, "They're not going for Carla first. They're going for the restaurant. Tonight. During dinner service. A kitchen fire, they said. Tragic accident. Insurance should cover it." His voice broke. "They wanted me to make sure the sprinkler system was disabled." The pieces clicked together, Eddie's late-night inspections of the kitchen, his questions about the fire suppression systems, his insistence on learning every aspect of the restaurant's operations. It had never been about redemption. It had been about survival. Why are you telling me this now? Eddie turned from the window, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Because Mom taught us that family means protecting each other, no matter what. And I'm done letting them use my love for you as a weapon. Before Max could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Carla. Something's wrong. Large wine delivery just arrived. Never ordered it. Delivery men are acting strange. Call me. The brothers locked eyes, understanding passing between them. Whatever came next would change everything. We need to get to the restaurant, Max said, already moving toward the door. Now. But Eddie's hand on his arm stopped him. Wait. There's something else you need to know first. Something about who's really behind all this. And why they chose our family. Outside, a car engine started, then another. The sound of closing doors echoed through the empty house like gunshots. I don't think we're going anywhere, big brother, Eddie whispered. They're here. The silence in their mother's house grew thick with unspoken truths. Max watched shadows move past the windows, feeling the weight of every decision that had led them here. Beside him, Eddie's breathing was shallow, his hands trembling as he pulled a worn envelope from his jacket. Remember when Mom got sick? Eddie's voice was barely a whisper. Remember how the treatment suddenly got approved, how we found that specialist who miraculously had an opening? Max felt the ground shift beneath him. What are you saying? They approached me before prison. Max said they could help Mom, get her the care she needed. All I had to do was. Eddie's voice cracked. I thought I was protecting our family. But I just opened the door for them. The revelation settled over Max like falling ash. Their mother's last years, her peaceful passing, all of it tainted now by this hidden corruption. He remembered her final days, how she'd gripped his hand and made him promise to watch over Eddie. He feels things too deeply, she'd said. It makes him vulnerable to people who know how to use that. They never let go, did they? Max asked softly. Even after she was gone, they kept their hooks in you. The debt kept growing. In prison, they were my protection, my connection to the outside world. By the time I got out. Eddie ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Max's heart ache. They owned me, body and soul. And then they showed me those photos of you and Carla. Max's phone buzzed again, another message from Carla, police are here. Something about unauthorized deliveries at other restaurants too. Max, please tell me you're safe. The sound of footsteps on the porch ended any chance of response. Eddie moved quickly, pressing the envelope into Max's hands. Evidence, he whispered. Account numbers, names, everything I could gather. They don't know I kept records. Get it to Carla, she'll know what to do. Eddie. I'm not asking for forgiveness anymore, Max. Eddie's eyes held a clarity Max hadn't seen in years. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. To be the brother Mom always believed I could be. The front door burst open, bringing with it the scarred man from the restaurant and two others. Their mother's photos rattled on the walls, witnesses to this final confrontation in a house built on love and shattered by betrayal. Family reunion. The scarred man's smile was cold. How touching. Though I notice Mrs. Reeves isn't here. Shame, we have some questions about her hobby of photography. Max felt Eddie tense beside him, saw his brother's hand slip into his pocket. Leave her out of this, Max growled. Whatever debt Eddie owes, I'll pay it. Just leave my family alone. The scarred man laughed. Oh, Mr. Reeves, you don't understand. This was never about money. Your restaurant, your reputation, they're just bonus prizes. This was about teaching a lesson about loyalty. About what happens to people who think they can gather evidence against us. He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a phone. Your wife is about to receive some interesting deliveries at the restaurant. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to ensure that when the authorities arrive, they'll find everything they need to shut you down permanently. Amazing what you can hide in wine bottles these days. Max felt the world narrow to a single point of fury. But before he could move, Eddie stepped forward. "Show them," he said quietly. "What?" "Show them the video, Max. The one I know Carla's been recording since I walked into your restaurant that first day." Eddie's voice was steady now, certain. "Show them what real loyalty looks like." Max pulled out his phone, understanding dawning. Every conversation, every late-night meeting, every exchange, Carla hadn't just been documenting Eddie's betrayal. She'd been building a case, piece by piece, against the entire operation. The scarred man's smile faltered as Max pressed play. On the screen, his own voice filled the room, detailing operations, naming names, all captured by the sophisticated surveillance system Carla had installed weeks ago. "Did you really think she'd just take photos?" Eddie asked, something like pride in his voice. "My sister-in-law's smarter than that. She's been working with the FBI since the day I showed up. Because that's what family does, they protect each other, even from themselves." The revelation hung in the air like smoke before a fire. In that moment of shocked silence, Max heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. He saw the future splitting into paths, choices that would reshape everything they'd built and lost and found again. The scarred man's hand moved toward his jacket, but Eddie was faster. In one fluid motion, he shoved Max toward the kitchen door, placing himself between his brother and danger. "Run," he shouted. "Get the evidence to Carla. I'll hold them here." Max hesitated, torn between brotherhood and survival. "Eddie. Go." Eddie's eyes met his, filled with a lifetime of regret and love. "Let me do this one thing right. Let me be the brother you deserved." As Max fled through the back door, the sound of struggling erupted behind him. His mother's house, keeper of so many memories, would now hold one more. But whether it would be a story of redemption or tragedy remained to be written in the moments to come. The autumn wind carried the scent of smoke and sirens through Boston's streets as Max raced toward Bistro 1955. Each step echoed with the sounds he'd left behind in his mother's house, the struggle, Eddie's last words, the weight of sacrifice heavy in the envelope pressed against his chest. His phone vibrated constantly now, messages from Carla mixing with alerts about suspicious deliveries at the restaurant. The pieces of their carefully constructed life were shifting, reorganizing themselves into something new and uncertain. When he rounded the corner onto his street, the scene before him stole his breath. Police cars surrounded the restaurant, their lights painting the evening in alternating red and blue. In the center of it all stood Carla, directing FBI agents with the same quiet authority she used to run dinner service. Their eyes met across the chaos, and 20 years of marriage allowed them to have an entire conversation in that single glance. She saw the envelope in his hands, the absence of his brother, the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. He saw her strength, her fear, her unwavering love that had built a fortress around their family long before the threats became tangible. "Eddie?" she asked softly when he reached her. Max's silence was answer enough. She took his hand, absorbing his trembling into her steadiness. "The FBI found everything," she said. "The wine shipments, the money, the connections. They've been building this case for months, waiting for the right moment. Eddie's information was the final piece they needed." "You knew?" The question held no accusation, only wonder at her capacity to carry such burdens alone. "I suspected, from the first day he walked into our restaurant. The way he looked at me, not with guilt, but with relief." Carla's voice softened. "He came to me that night, Max told me everything about your mother's treatment, about the hold they had on him. He wanted to make it right, but he needed help doing it safely." The revelation settled over Max like gentle rain, washing away layers of doubt and betrayal to reveal the truth beneath. Eddie hadn't come back to destroy their lives, he'd come back to save them, knowing the price he might have to pay. A commotion at the end of the street drew their attention. Police cars were converging on their mother's house, their sirens silent but lights blazing. Max started to move, but Carla's hand held him firm. "Wait," she whispered. Through the gathering crowd, a figure emerged, limping, bloodied, but alive. Eddie walked between two FBI agents, his head held high despite his injuries. The scarred man and his associates followed in handcuffs, their earlier bravado replaced by grim silence. When Eddie saw Max and Carla, his steps faltered. In his eyes was the look of a man expecting judgment, preparing himself for the weight of consequences. But Max saw something else too, the shadow of the little boy who'd once followed him everywhere, who'd believed his big brother could fix anything. Max moved forward, Carla's hand still in his, and closed the distance between them. No words were needed. He pulled his brother into an embrace, careful of his injuries but firm in his forgiveness. Eddie's sob was muffled against his shoulder, years of pain and fear finally finding release. "I didn't think you'd understand," Eddie whispered. "Mom would have," Max replied simply. "She always said love was about seeing the truth in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." Later that night, after the statements were given and the evidence secured, the three of them sat in the quiet of the closed restaurant. The dining room, usually filled with the warmth of hospitality, held a different kind of comfort now, the comfort of survival, of truth finally spoken, of family redefined by choice rather than obligation. "What happens now?" Eddie asked, holding an ice pack to his swollen jaw. Carla poured 3 glasses of wine, not from the tainted deliveries, but from their private collection, saved for special occasions. "Now we rebuild," she said. "Together." Max looked around at his restaurant, at his wife, at his brother. The place still held the echoes of their struggle, but it also held the promise of renewal. Every scratch on the floors, every mark on the walls, every imperfection was a testament to survival. "We'll need to make some changes," he said, thinking of the long road ahead. "New suppliers, new security systems. The reputation will take time to rebuild." "And me?" Eddie's voice was small, uncertain. "You'll stay," Carla answered before Max could speak. "Family means second chances. Real ones, this time." The world outside was still full of shadows and uncertainties. The criminal organization's reach was vast, and the coming months would bring challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But as they sat together in the gathering darkness, Max realized that strength wasn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it was about learning to trust again, about accepting help, about understanding that family, real family, was built on truth rather than obligation. Their mother's house would stand empty now, its walls holding the story of their final confrontation. But its foundations, built on love and sacrifice, would continue to support them in ways they were only beginning to understand. As the night deepened, Max raised his glass. "To Mom," he said softly. "Who taught us that love is stronger than fear?" "To redemption," Carla added, her eyes meeting Eddie's with understanding. "To family," Eddie finished, his voice steady for the first time in years. "The ones we're born to, and the ones we choose to become." The glasses clinked, their sound echoing through the restaurant like a promise. Outside, Boston continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but inside Bistro 1955, 3 souls bound by blood, choice, and forgiveness had finally found their way home.